Hillbrook Insane Asylum Patient File Update. Entry by Dr Quinton Quartermain. Patient number 935. Amber, last name unknown. Otherwise referred to as the Giant. I think I made my stance on the nickname situation clear enough already. So instead, I'd just like to point out that the proper term for a female giant is giantess. If you're gonna insult the poor woman, at least do it right. Although all going well, you hopefully won't get the chance. As of today, number 935 has officially gone a full year without an outburst. Emotional stability has improved vastly, and the patient has yet to show any signs of regressing into old behaviour, even after we lowered the dosage. If everything goes smoothly, and I don't see any evidence as to why it shouldn't, we will be in the clear. I think we may have actually cured someone. I can't remember the last time this has happened here. If ever. And don't even think about bringing up number 682. Lobotomizing the patient does not count as a win. But yes, I do believe we pulled it off with this one. To be honest, I've always had high hopes for number 935. Well, as high as my hopes are physically able to get these days. Which isn't all that high. But yes, I'm quite proud of how far she's come, considering what she's been through. And even I feel it's important that, on occasion, we spotlight one of the cases where, despite its many faults, Hillbrook can do something right. It's especially important right now, for as you may have heard, due to this place's past failings, a group called the Silent already sort of hates us and wants to kill us. Don't go into the cave. That's where the giant lives. It can break stone with its bare hands. It'll grind your bones and drink your blood. These were just some of the tales the local children would spin about a supposed giant that lived in the woods. A massive creature that devoured anyone and anything that dared enter its domain. This had all started some time ago. A bunch of rumours have been flying around concerning the recent disappearances of some of the local wildlife and a couple of pets. Theory was that some big new predator must have moved in. This was spurred on by multiple reports of animals actively staying away from one particular cave, several even abandoning otherwise perfectly fine habitats just to put some distance between them and it. Then, a couple of weeks later, a discovery was made. A footprint in the dirt that looked exactly like that of a human, only it was over twice the size of a regular one. This naturally got people talking, but like most urban legends, nobody paid it too much notice. Certainly made a fun point of interest for those passing through town though. Such was the case with one Christopher Bloomfield. Little Chris was used to travelling. His mother was a very wealthy lady, owning multiple homes. Her job took her, and by extension her son, all over the world, so she had to make sure they always had a place to stay. On this occasion, they were staying in a lavish manor house out in the countryside, just a short walk away from the town. Chris loved his mother, but he did wish they didn't have to move around so much. It made making friends very difficult. Nonetheless, whenever they did move to a new place, Chris would always make the most of it. Despite his very young age, he was fairly independent. Had to be, what with mother often being out doing business. One day, he decided to head into town to soak up some of the culture, as it were. Maybe meet some new friends, fleeting as they may be. This is what had led to him learning of the giant in the cave. And while most treated it as a warning to stay away, for the overly curious Chris, it was quite the opposite. Now, Chris wasn't an idiot. He'd been to enough alien crash sites, Bigfoot sightings, and true birthplaces of such and such to know that 9 times out of 10, these sort of things turn out to be some hoax meant to draw up tourism. But he was still a kid. Stuff like this was like playing pretend, only everyone's in on it, including the grown-ups. More fun that way. Making it all the more disappointing when none of the other children would go giant hunting with him, all saying they were too scared. And when he eventually found the cave, he began to understand why. The forest had an abundance of animal life. On that day alone, Chris had caught sight of squirrels, foxes, even a deer. Here, though, nothing. The area surrounding the mouth to the cave, the entire clearing, was devoid of any signs of life. Everything, it seemed, had been frightened away by whatever lived inside. Everything except Chris. Perhaps he needed proof that it was all a hoax so that he'd be able to sleep soundly that night. Perhaps a part of him wanted this creature to be real, for something fantastical to exist in this at times mundane world. Or perhaps he really was an idiot. In any case, he journeyed inside. From the outside, the cave looked large but not overly so. Within, however, it looked almost cavernous, being deeper, wider, taller, and darker than Chris ever anticipated. Something else he hadn't anticipated? The damp underfoot. Sporadically, as he walked, he could feel something soft and wet squelch against the soles of his shoes. For a while, he thought he was stepping through mud, except if it were mud, wouldn't it be more consistent? There were plenty of moments where he found perfectly solid dry footing. It was only after he finally reached the source of light, a hole in the cave ceiling where the sun managed to peek through, that the horrific truth was revealed. Spread out across the cave floor were the remains of various animals. Everything from rabbits to skunks, even a couple of birds. Some were still fresh, others had long since rotted into indistinguishable masses of dead flesh and bone. Upon seeing this, as well as all the blood and guts that had amassed on his feet, the once oh so confident little boy freaked out, his scream of terror echoing throughout the cave. He soon wished he had kept quiet, however, as it became apparent that he wasn't the only living thing inside. Something began to stir in the darkness. Heavy footsteps, accompanied by the sound of dragging chains, began approaching, as an all-encompassing shadow loomed overhead. It was at this point the lad's common sense finally kicked in, and he thought, maybe I should leave. He ran as fast as he could, trying to head back the way he came, though with the poor lighting, that was easier said than done. Chris couldn't see anything unless it was right in front of him. And even then, just because he could see the wall he was about to run into, doesn't mean he was able to avoid it. He struck his head on a jutting out piece of rock before falling to the ground, giving him just enough time to see a hulking figure close in on him before losing consciousness. When he regained it, Chris was unnerved to find the figure even closer, towering over him as they pressed a hand against his still pained forehead. He tried to shuffle away, get out of their grip. Seeing this, the giant spoke. "Don't run. I can be gentle. I promise." Certainly wasn't the voice he'd been expecting. It sounded almost as scared as he was. In this sudden moment of calm, Chris took a better look at this giant. For starters, it was a girl, which surprised him. All those fairy tale stories had rather cemented the oaf-is-balding fat bloke image. Secondly, for all the talk of her being some ravenous monster, she didn't look all that monstrous. Oh sure, she was inhumanly tall. Even crouching down to tend to his head wound, she was still more than twice Chris's height. But that aside, she wasn't all that scary looking. Her unkempt hair stretched all the way down to her ankles, strapped around which were a pair of steel manacles on chains, a similar pair being around her wrists. Besides that, all she wore was a tattered, dirty dress, a portion of which she'd torn off to clean Chris's wound with. She didn't look like a ferocious beast. She looked like somebody who needed help. So the two just ended up talking for a bit. The giantess said her name was Amber. Just Amber. She didn't have a surname. Didn't have a family, period. She never knew her parents or even where she came from. Of course, the question of how she got so big came up pretty quick. and through slightly stilted words, Amber explained that she'd always been big. Bigger than all the other kids. They all used to live together in an orphanage, but they never got along. Everyone used to tease her for being the tallest child there by a clear couple of feet. Said she was an overgrown freak and that's why nobody would adopt her. This taunting persisted for several years, and while Amber did her best to ignore it, it was becoming harder and harder to contain her frustrations. Especially when it came to that boy. See, Amber's condition causes her to grow at an accelerated rate. This naturally caused her a lot of health issues, one of the biggest being her equilibrium. She has bad balance and has to take extra care not to topple over. This boy, Amber never learned his name, was well aware of this and took every opportunity to exploit it, tripping her up and shoving her down whenever he got the chance. Always having run off by the time she found her bearings, leaving Amber on the floor to be mocked by everybody else. She hated it, and it all came to a boiling point one day. The children were out playing in the yard. For Amber, playing consisted of her walking over to the corner and sitting by herself in silence. But then, the boy came along and put out his leg. To him, it was just another innocent prank. She'd trip over, he'd run away, everyone else would get a good laugh out of it. The usual. Wasn't that way for Amber. To her, it was the last straw. It was high time that he knew how it felt. The moment she hit the ground, she turned over, got up, and went for him. Her rage completely took over as she threw her fist straight into his back at full force. However, there's another aspect to Amber's condition, one that in this moment of anger, she'd completely forgotten. The birth defect that causes her rapid growth also influences her muscles and bone marrow, making her physically stronger. Now, this is a good thing because otherwise her body would have collapsed in on itself long ago. The downside is that it makes it harder for her to properly judge the fragility of everything and everyone around her. She didn't just knock the boy down, she dislocated his entire right arm. He lay there, so still, bleeding out on the ground. She thought she killed him. So did the other children, all fleeing at the sight of this. Amber was horrified. She never meant to do that. Scared and confused, she did the only thing she could think of. She ran. Couple of days later, she'd come to regret that decision. She was on the road, with no food, no water, and no idea where she was going. She was so desperate she would have accepted help from anyone. It's just unfortunate that the first person to offer it happened to be the owner of a travelling freak show. This is how Amber would spend the rest of her childhood, as a sideshow attraction. The world's tallest girl, later rebranded as the world's tallest woman once she entered her late teens. What's sad is, at the rate she was going, she probably would have garnered that title anyway, even if the freak show hadn't done what they ended up doing to her. We found evidence that during this time, she was injected with a combination of growth hormones and steroids, most likely in an attempt to aggravate her condition further and make her more freakish looking. She was now a 10-foot tall, 475-pound mountain of muscle, strong enough to bend solid steel. This rather ironically meant that her captors often had to spend most of the profit they now made off of her on stronger restraints for her cage due to her constantly breaking them in escape attempts. Got to the point where she was under constant guard even during the shows. But then one day came when Amber awoke to find nobody guarding her cage. In fact, she couldn't find anyone. The people who ran the freak show, the carnival staff, everyone was gone. There was some kind of commotion going on outside. She could hear yelling and even a couple of gunshots. Taking advantage of the situation, she snapped her chains, broke through the bars, and ran to freedom. But not to civilization. After everything that had happened, Amber thought maybe those kids were right. Maybe she was too big to be amongst normal people. So she moved out here and had been living amongst the wilderness ever since. At this moment, Chris decided to address the elephant in the room, or rather address the mass quantities of dead animals in the cave. The truth was, Amber had never intended to kill them. She actually really liked animals, she just wasn't very good at handling them properly. And that reminds me, to those who keep making the "tell me about the rabbits, George" jokes, I keep telling you, patient number 935 hasn't read Of Mice and Men. You're just confusing her. Although while on the subject, to whichever orderly keeps playing the Afrojack song 10 Feet Tall over her cell's intercom, do carry on. She actually really likes that song. And now, where was I? Amber did want to rejoin human society. She just thought it'd be a good idea to get a better handle on her increased strength first, so that she didn't hurt anyone. The animals in that respect were trial runs, you might say. Though since the wildlife started avoiding her cave, she resorted to practicing with twigs and branches instead. While it took some time, she had indeed learned how to hold and touch things without breaking them. As for sustenance, she'd been surviving on nuts, berries, and the water from a nearby stream, none of which were particularly appetizing. Saddened by Amber's tale, Chris felt almost compelled to help her. Over the next few days, he would bring her food, spend time with her, and basically did the one thing that everybody else in Amber's life seemed incapable of doing: treat her like a human being. Unfortunately, this couldn't last. Chris's mother had finished up her business here. Knowing this meant they'd soon be off to their next home, Chris snuck out at night to see Amber one last time. But it appeared they weren't even going to get a chance to say goodbye. Before either could say much of anything, they heard a scream, turning to see Chris's mother nearby. She'd been curious about where he'd been running off to recently and decided to follow him. Upon seeing Amber, she grabbed Chris, despite his protests, and ran with him straight back to the manor. While Amber begged them not to go, she didn't pursue. The message was clear. She was indeed destined to be alone, forever. So you can imagine her joy when Chris soon returned, accompanied by his very apologetic-looking mother. She said she was sorry, that Amber had surprised her and she was just thinking about her son's safety. After Chris had explained everything to her, not only did she accept Amber, she welcomed her into their home, got the manacles off, gave her a wash and a much-needed haircut, even called in a favour from an associate to get some tailor-made clothes for her. Best of all, when it did come time for her and Chris to leave, she invited Amber to come along. For the two friends, things couldn't have been better. It no longer mattered to Chris that they were constantly on the move, although the next home they went to was, well, frankly, a lot more decrepit looking than the last one. He now had a constant companion on the journey with him. Amber finally felt a sense of belonging, that she wasn't alone in the world anymore. She still got stares, sure, but thanks in part to Chris's presence, people found her a lot more approachable. Usually little kids. Understandable, as due to her lack of much education, or really any human interaction, Amber still retained the mindset of a kid herself. Whenever they went out together, Chris's mother would explain away Amber's presence by introducing her as her eldest daughter, having just returned from being treated for gigantism in Europe. This confused Amber. Chris's mother was her mother now? Did that make Chris her brother? Was she part of her family? Yes, she was certain of it. She loved her family deeply, wanting nothing more than to give something back for all they'd given her. So, when Mother asked her to help her out at work, of course she agreed. Mother's job was a little strange. It involved fixing up people's houses and other buildings, but only at night. It was Amber's task to rip off faulty locks so that they could later be replaced, and to help Mother up to out-of-reach places. If you haven't caught on yet, Mother, or rather Jacqueline Bloomfield, better known as simply Jack, wasn't being completely upfront with Amber, or Chris for that matter. She wasn't some hugely wealthy businesswoman, but a professional thief and burglar. The houses they'd stayed in weren't actually hers. Rather, they just happened to be unoccupied and within reach of her current target. And she hadn't taken in Amber out of the goodness of her heart. She'd been wanting to up her game. Now she had the muscle to do it. The pair had some pretty good scores so far, but it was while in New York that Jack decided to go for the big one. Her target, Leroy Fitzroy. He used to handle money for the mob, but after taking advantage of a recent power vacuum, had become something of a rising star in the criminal underworld, now operating multiple rackets and extortion jobs from which he'd amassed a sizable fortune. And having scouted out his high-rise apartment, Jack had located the oversized safe where he kept it all. Her problem was that it was so secure, it'd take far too long to break into there. But Amber could literally just pick it up and carry it home, allowing Jack to crack it open at her leisure. Admittedly, trying to be stealthy when you're twice as tall as the average person isn't exactly easy. Jack was certain that at least one security camera must have caught a glance at them as they made off with the goods. But if all went to plan, they'd be out of the country before anyone could do anything about it anyway. That said, Jack still asked that Chris and Amber stay at home whilst their mother fixed up this faulty safe. Didn't want to run the risk of Amber getting recognized. But this was their last night in the big city. Chris really wanted to get some sightseeing in, and Amber could never say no to her little brother. So the two snuck out, setting out for the Statue of Liberty. Unfortunately, despite her best efforts to be as subtle as possible with the theft, Jack's negative waves hit home, and hit hard. Although speaking of subtlety, for a man of such power and influence, you'd think Fitzroy would have sprung from a more low-key form of assassination than a drive-by shooting. Didn't even work. Amber caught her foot on the pavement and stumbled over, accidentally but quite effectively missing the hail of gunfire. Sadly, this meant it only had one other place to go. Straight into the little boy standing next to her. I've, at my own peril, asked Amber how she felt at this moment. She told me she can't recall much of it. She heard Chris scream, saw his lifeless body fall, and then everything went white. It wasn't until over an hour later that she realized what she'd done. Mass tailbacks near Battery Park that afternoon turned out to be caused by what appeared to be a partially compacted car, within which 4 trapped mobsters slowly bled to death. All that anger and frustration she'd been suppressing. All those negative feelings she'd locked away, ironically out of fear of hurting anyone else ever again. It had built up, and now had a point of focus. One her mother planned to put to good use. Upon hearing of her son's death, Jack swore vengeance on Fitzroy, vowing to do whatever she had to in order to bring him down. While she had been blacklisted throughout most criminal circles, the presence of her oversized bodyguard was enough to convince some of the city's low-level thugs to join up with her. Nobody wanted to be on the business end of those fists. As for Amber herself, she was pathologically loyal to Jack at this point. Her mother had been furious when she told her what had happened, and she didn't want to run the risk of losing what little family she had left. So she agreed to do whatever Jack asked in order to please her, even if she knew it was wrong. Despite this and her earlier actions, Amber still felt uneasy about killing, but Jack soon found an easy workaround. All she had to do was so much as imply that the person standing before Amber had something, anything, to do with Chris's death, and within minutes, said person would have been pounded into a fine red paste. Of course, with each kill, it became easier. Eventually, Amber stopped caring altogether. All that mattered was pleasing mother. Jack's gang was small yet effective. They pulled off various robberies and smash and grabs, all in the name of disrupting Fitzroy's operations. Well, that and money, obviously, but telling Amber it was all for revenge helped keep her motivated. And by motivated, I mean filled with murderous rage. Pretty soon, Fitzroy was feeling the pressure. After seeing what Jack's freakishly huge lackey had done to some of his men, he decided it might be best to get out of town for a bit, wait for the heat to die down. He took every precaution during his exit from New York, but even the most bulletproof of cars, the most skilled of chauffeurs, the toughest of bodyguards, and the deadliest of guns do very little to defend against someone throwing a hatchback at you. Crawling out of the wreckage with his surviving bodyguards, Fitzroy saw Jack and all of her gang standing before him, including Amber, front and center. She'd been dressed up in a fancy suit to look the part, but had been outfitted top to bottom with armor plating, meaning she was basically a walking bullet shield. Something a couple of Fitzroy's men learned a tad too late to do them much good, as she barreled straight through them. As his remaining goons fended off the gang members, Fitzroy legged it to a nearby fire escape, thinking that navigating the cramped ladderwork would slow Amber down. He was wrong though, as she forewent it altogether, instead scaling the wall of the building itself like a wild animal, Jack clinging to her back all the way. Reaching the rooftops, it didn't take Amber long to catch Fitzroy. She was going to cave his skull in right then and there, only for Jack to stop her. This was a special kill, after all. She had to take her time with this one. So, at her mother's command, Amber planted her foot on Fitzroy's chest, pinning him to the ground, before grabbing his ankles and proceeding to slowly bend his legs the wrong way until the bones snapped. This was all the damage she managed to do, as a blinding light suddenly engulfed the rooftop. Before the three of them now stood a masked figure, clad in a cloak that shined like the morning sun. Stunned by this dazzling stranger, none were prepared for when she shot beams of light from her hands. While they did little visible harm, their harsh impact was enough to quickly incapacitate both Jack and Fitzroy. Not that the latter was really in any state to run away anyway. But Amber's body armor held long enough for her to close the gap between them and go in for a clothesline. She didn't care who this stranger was. All she saw was another obstacle getting in her way of killing Fitzroy, one she'd quickly dispose of. Or so she thought. For the moment her fist should have connected with her concealed face, the stranger vanished in a brilliant flash of light, only to reappear behind Amber, firing another beam. Undeterred, Amber went in for another punch, getting the same result. Still, she kept at it, moving faster the madder she got, trying to get ahead of her foe. Something that became impossible when, in another flash of light, there appeared another cloaked stranger, identical to the first. And then another. And then another. A whole horde of them had come out of nowhere, all continuing the relentless attack. Confused and fed up, Amber grabbed hold of the fire escape, ripping the whole thing from its foundations. She may have swung it like it was made of cardboard, but it still hit like a half-ton of steel railings should. Strangely though, when she attacked the horde of enemies, the railings just phased right through them, as if they weren't real. Special effects, holograms, whatever they weren't really there. Only one of them was genuine. Most would be happy to discover that they were really only handling one enemy instead of a whole army. For Amber though, not being able to physically hit these fakers just served to infuriate her further. She threw the fire escape down, shattering it into a pile of twisted metal. But she didn't stop there. Completely consumed by rage, she repeatedly slammed the rooftop over and over, the iron and concrete soon giving way to her immense power. All fell down into the floor underneath, the holograms dissipating, leaving only the true stranger, now trapped under some rubble. This was her chance. Amber hurtled toward her, ready to deal one final blow. Then, She stopped. The stranger had brought forth another illusion of light. Amber's fist had already gone straight through its head, but as she pulled back, she found this facade was not of the stranger, but of Chris. He was looking up at her with a face of fear, a face she hadn't seen in him since in the cave all that time ago. Then at last, the stranger said something. Is this the sister he loved? Staring down at her once gentle hands, now stained with the blood of her victims, Amber realized, no, she wasn't. Lost in her anger, her longing for revenge, she'd become the very thing she tried so hard not to be. The thing the children used to call her. The thing Chris had been scared of. A bloodthirsty, merciless monster. As the stranger got out from under the debris, Amber fell to her knees, her vision clouding for once not with rage, but with tears of remorse. While she was originally sent to Blackburn Prison along with her mother, Amber was soon transferred here for proper treatment. It was touch and go for a while. The hardest part was getting her to understand how she was being used by Jack, that it was essentially the freak show again, only under the pretense of being a loving family. Still, she doesn't have to worry about her ever again. Apparently, while in the slammer, one of Jack's old rivals caught up with her. She was found the next day, having been drowned in one of the restrooms. Not the most dignified way to go. Fitzroy, on the other hand, is still out there. The evidence against him didn't stick, and he ended up walking. Well, not literally, the man will never walk again, but you get what I mean. He cut his losses, ditched New York, and moved into politics, last I heard. Scumbag's doing well for himself. Over time, I've helped Amber recognize that anger is not inherently a bad emotion to have. It's what you do with it. I've also made efforts to help bring some joy back into her life. Her fondness for animals has been a great angle to work from, helped in no small part by my new pet cat. That's right, Waffles. You're helping cure patients now. Yes, you are. Yes, you are, you good girl, you. Sorry, I'm not sure what that was. Anyway, in my opinion, Amber is cured. There's just one problem. Where do we send her? I mean, she has no family, she has no qualifications or real-world skills, and one of the only places that's really equipped to meet her needs, if just barely, is Hillbrook. One of the few people this place manages to cure, and it's one of the people with nowhere else to go. Yeah, that seems about right. End recording.